When we talk about medieval war, we often talk about kings, generals, and great battles. But almost no one talks about the soldier, the ordinary man who woke up every day inside a war he did not control, who carried his equipment, followed orders, and lived months, sometimes years, away from home. This story is about him, not about what he did in battle, but about how he lived during war, how he spent his days, how he ate, slept, waited, worried, and endured. Most medieval soldiers were not warriors by choice. They were farmers, craftsmen, laborers, men whose lives were interrupted by war and reshaped by routine and necessity. For them, war was not a series of heroic moments. It was a daily condition, a life of repetition, fatigue, uncertainty, and small habits that made each day survivable. In this story, we will follow the rhythm of a medieval soldier's life, slowly, quietly, and honestly, focusing not on spectacle, but on the human experience behind it. You don't need to concentrate. You don't need to imagine everything perfectly. Just listen and let the story unfold. Before thinking about battles, marches, or campaigns, it's important to slow down and look closely at the person at the center of this story. The medieval soldier was not a symbol. He was not an idea. He was not a character shaped for legend. He was a man living inside circumstances he did not fully control. Most medieval soldiers did not wake up one day deciding to become warriors. Their lives followed ordinary paths, shaped by land, family, and routine. Many spent their early years working fields, repairing tools, tending animals, or learning a trade from someone older than them. Life was physical, repetitive, and predictable. Days followed seasons. Seasons followed years. And then, slowly or suddenly, war entered that rhythm. Sometimes it came as an obligation. A lord called for men. A village was required to provide bodies. Refusal carried consequences: fines, punishment, loss of land, or worse. Sometimes it came as necessity. Poverty pushed men towards service. Food shortages made the army's rations look appealing. Shelter, even temporary, felt safer than home. For others, war arrived quietly. One decision led to another. A short commitment became a longer one. Before fully realizing it, the soldier found himself far from home, living among strangers, carrying equipment that no longer felt foreign. Once inside the army, individuality began to fade in subtle ways. Names mattered less than positions. Stories mattered less than roles. Personal history became something carried quietly, rarely shared. The soldier learned quickly that standing out was dangerous. Attention invited responsibility, and responsibility invited risk. Blending in was safer. Being part of the group meant survival. Equipment was rarely personal. Armor had been worn by others before. Weapons showed signs of repair, of reuse. Nothing felt new. Everything felt borrowed, temporary, imperfect. This shaped how soldiers saw themselves. They were not heroes. They were parts of a system, a fragile one. The idea of courage, too, was different from what we imagine today. Courage was not charging forward. It was staying in place, holding formation, remaining present when fear whispered constantly. Fear was always there, not sharp, not dramatic, but quiet and persistent. Fear of hunger, fear of illness, fear of being forgotten, fear of dying far from home, unnamed and unremembered. And yet most soldiers did not spend their days thinking about death. Thinking too far ahead made the weight unbearable. Instead, they focused on the immediate. What needed to be done next? What could be fixed? What could be endured? Over time, war stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like an environment, a condition that shaped posture, sleep, speech, and thought. The soldier's body adapted first. Muscles hardened. Movements became economical. Energy was conserved instinctively. Nothing was wasted, not steps, not words, not effort. The mind followed. Expectations lowered. Hope became practical rather than emotional. Dreams shrank to manageable size. A warm meal, a dry night, a moment of rest. This was not despair. It was adjustment. The medieval soldier learned how to live inside uncertainty, how to exist without clarity, how to move forward without knowing where the road would end. And this quiet adaptation, more than any battle, defined who he truly was. Because before the marching, before the waiting, before the long days in camp, there was a man slowly becoming someone shaped by war, day after day, without ceremony. And that transformation began the moment he woke up inside the camp, facing another ordinary day in an extraordinary life. Over time, war changed the medieval soldier in ways that were not immediately visible. There was no single moment when he felt different, no clear dividing line between who he had been before and who he was becoming. The change happened quietly, through repetition. The body adapted first. Marching reshaped posture. Carrying equipment every day altered balance. Muscles strengthened in some places and weakened in others. Movements became efficient, almost economical. Nothing was wasted. Energy had to last. Pain became familiar. Not alarming, not dramatic, simply present. A constant ache in the back, stiffness in the legs, hands roughened by work and exposure. Injuries healed imperfectly, leaving reminders that never fully faded. The soldier learned to measure effort carefully. Running was avoided unless necessary. Sudden movements were rare. Everything was deliberate. Rest, when it came, was shallow. Sleep existed, but it was rarely complete. The body learned to wake quickly, to respond to sound, to return to alertness without confusion. Over time, exhaustion stopped feeling urgent. It became background noise. The mind adapted as well. Thoughts narrowed. The soldier learned not to imagine too much. Thinking far ahead invited anxiety. Thinking too far back invited longing. Staying in the present was safer. This mental discipline was not taught. It emerged naturally. Hope became quiet. Fear became steady. Emotions softened rather than disappeared. There was little room for anger. Anger required energy. There was little room for joy. Joy felt risky, temporary. Instead, the soldier lived in a middle space, not numb, but contained. Social bonds formed slowly. Trust was built through proximity rather than conversation. Men learned each other's habits, rhythms, silences. Friendship existed, but it was understated. Loss, when it came, was absorbed quietly. A man who stood nearby yesterday might not be there today. Questions were rarely asked. Explanations were rarely given. Grief had no ceremony. It existed briefly, then folded into routine. The soldier did not harden into cruelty. He hardened into endurance. This endurance defined his inner world. He became someone who could live with uncertainty without demanding resolution. Someone who could function without clarity. War did not make him fearless. It taught him how to carry fear without letting it rule him. And this balance, between alertness and restraint, between fatigue and function, shaped every moment of his daily life. It influenced how he worked, how he rested, how he interacted with others. And it followed him into the smallest details of the day, especially the routines that filled most of his time. Most of a medieval soldier's life during war unfolded not on the battlefield, but inside the camp. The camp was not a place of excitement. It was a place of repetition. Each day followed a rhythm that rarely changed. The soldier learned this rhythm quickly, not because it was explained, but because resisting it made life harder. Morning arrived quietly. There were no clear beginnings, no signals to announce the day. Light slowly replaced darkness, and cold lingered even after the sun rose. The soldier woke because his body no longer tolerated the ground beneath him. Muscles stiffened if he stayed still too long. Dampness crept through thin layers of cloth. Comfort was not expected. Around him, others were waking in the same way. No one rushed. There was no reason to. The day would be long and conserving energy mattered. The camp itself looked temporary, even after weeks or months of use. Tents leaned unevenly. Cloth was patched and repatched. Ropes frayed. Wooden stakes loosened in soft ground. Nothing felt permanent, and yet everything felt settled. The soldier began his day with small tasks: adjusting equipment, tightening straps, checking boots. These actions were repeated daily, almost unconsciously. Weapons were maintained constantly, not out of anticipation for battle, but because neglect accumulated quickly. Rust formed overnight. Leather cracked. Small failures became dangerous later. Food, when available, was simple: bread that was hard or stale, thin broth when supplies allowed. Eating was not a moment of pleasure. It was functional, enough to continue. Hunger never fully disappeared. It hovered quietly, shaping behavior. Soldiers learned not to eat quickly, not to expect fullness. Much of the day was spent waiting. Waiting for orders that might not come, waiting for movement that never happened, waiting for news that traveled slowly and often arrived distorted. Guard duty filled many hours, standing still, watching open land, paths, tree lines. Most of the time, nothing moved, and yet attention never fully relaxed. The soldier learned how to watch without expectation, how to remain alert without excitement. Awareness became a posture rather than a feeling. Conversations happened in fragments, short exchanges, repeated stories, familiar phrases, talking past time, but silence was equally common. Men spoke about home, but not too often. Thinking too much about home made the present harder to endure. Memories were handled carefully. Laughter existed, but it was brief, dry, unremarkable. Humor came from small observations rather than jokes. As the day stretched on, the camp felt heavy with stillness. Activity existed, but nothing urgent. The soldier moved when needed, rested when possible. There was no sense of progress, no feeling of accomplishment, just continuation. As evening approached, the camp changed again. Fires were lit but kept low. Smoke drifted gently. The smell of damp wood mixed with earth and worn fabric. The soldier's body felt the weight of the day. Fatigue settled deeper now. Movements slowed naturally. Evening meals mirrored morning ones. Repetition without surprise. As darkness returned, routines tightened. Armor was loosened, but not removed completely. Weapons stayed close. Boots were positioned carefully. Night watch rotated quietly. Those assigned to guard accepted it without complaint. Sleep was never guaranteed. For everyone else, rest arrived cautiously. Bodies lay down, but minds stayed partially awake. The camp at night was never fully quiet. Small sounds traveled far: a cough, a step, fabric shifting in the wind. Sleep came in fragments, short stretches, light dreams, sudden waking without reason. This was life inside the camp. Not dramatic, not heroic, but continuous. And it was inside this continuity, this slow, repetitive existence, that medieval soldiers truly lived their war. Because before battles, before marches, before anything changed, there were days like this, and there were many of them. As weeks passed inside the camp, the medieval soldier became increasingly aware of how fragile daily life truly was. Not because of enemies, but because of the environment itself. Food was never guaranteed. Supplies arrived inconsistently, often delayed by weather, distance, or decisions made far away. When provisions were plentiful, soldiers ate without celebration. When they were scarce, no one complained loudly. Hunger was expected. Meals followed no strict schedule. Eating happened when food appeared. Bread was the most common staple. Rough, dense, sometimes already turning stale. Meat was rare and often poorly preserved. Vegetables depended entirely on season and location. The soldier learned to eat slowly, to stretch small portions, to stop before feeling full, because fullness was temporary. Hunger did not always feel sharp. More often, it felt dull and constant, a background pressure that shaped mood and energy. Over time, the body adapted, but strength quietly faded. Water posed its own risks. Clean sources were not always available. Rivers carried disease. Wells were unreliable. Illness often arrived not from wounds, but from what soldiers drank each day. Sickness spread easily in camp conditions. Coughs lingered. Fevers appeared suddenly. Cuts that seemed minor became infected. Without proper treatment, recovery depended on rest and chance. Many soldiers carried lingering illnesses without fully realizing it. Weakness became normal. Pain became expected. The weather amplified everything. Rain turned camps into mud. Tents sagged. Clothing stayed wet for days. Boots never fully dried. Cold seeped into joints and stayed there. Heat brought exhaustion. Armor trapped warmth. Dehydration crept in quietly. Sun exposure wore the body down faster than any enemy. There was no shelter from seasons. Winter was endured, summer was survived. The soldier learned to read weather instinctively. Cloud patterns mattered. Wind direction mattered. Small changes meant discomfort or relief. Fatigue accumulated slowly. Days blended together. Recovery never felt complete. Even rest carried weight. And yet the camp continued to function. Tasks were performed. Watches were kept. Equipment was maintained. Life did not stop because it was difficult. This was the quiet reality of war. Not dramatic suffering, not constant crisis, but steady erosion. The soldier did not collapse suddenly. He wore down gradually. Strength faded in small increments. Morale shifted quietly. Expectations adjusted downward. Still, he endured. Because endurance was not optional. It was the condition of survival. And as time passed, the soldier understood something deeply. War wasn't trying to kill him quickly. It was testing how long he could remain functional, and that test never stopped. More than hunger, more than cold, more than fatigue. What shaped the medieval soldier most deeply was waiting. Waiting was constant. Armies waited for orders. They waited for movement. They waited for weather to change. They waited for enemies who might never appear. Days passed in anticipation without resolution. Nothing happened, and yet everything felt tense. The soldier learned that waiting was not passive. It required attention, restraint, and patience. Sometimes, waiting ended suddenly. Orders arrived without warning. Camps were dismantled quickly. What had taken days to settle was taken apart in minutes. Tents collapsed. Fires were extinguished. Equipment was packed in practiced silence. Marching began. Marches were slow and exhausting. Roads were uneven, muddy, narrow. Progress was measured not in distance, but in endurance. The soldier walked for hours, carrying weight that never felt lighter. There was little conversation during marches. Breath was conserved. Focus narrowed to the ground ahead and the rhythm of steps. Feet blistered, legs burned, shoulders ached. Stopping brought relief, but also stiffness. Movement became easier than stillness. Marching was not heroic. It was labor. Sometimes marches led nowhere. Armies repositioned, then waited again. Movement did not guarantee action. Often, it only led to more uncertainty. Orders were rarely explained. Soldiers followed instructions without understanding the broader plan. Decisions were made far above them, by people they never saw. This lack of clarity shaped how soldiers thought. Expectation faded. Surprise became normal. A soldier learned not to assume anything, not to predict outcomes, not to imagine resolution. Time stretched, weeks blurred into one another. The memory of home softened at the edges. War became the dominant reality, not because it was violent, but because it was continuous. The mind adapted by lowering emotional intensity. Anticipation dulled. Fear flattened into awareness. The soldier lived in a state of readiness without excitement. Occasionally, rumors passed through camp, whispers of upcoming battles, stories of enemy movement. Most proved false. Some were delayed truths. The uncertainty itself became exhausting. And yet, soldiers endured it because there was no alternative. Leaving meant punishment. Disobedience meant consequences. Survival depended on conformity. This endurance shaped identity more than any fight. By the time combat finally arrived, if it arrived at all, the soldier was already changed, already worn, already conditioned by time rather than action. War had already done its work. Because for the medieval soldier, the greatest weight was not the battle. It was the days that came before it. For some medieval soldiers, war ended suddenly. For others, it never truly ended at all. When campaigns concluded, there was rarely a clear sense of closure. No ceremony marked the return to ordinary life. No moment officially declared that the soldier was no longer a soldier. Armies dissolved gradually. Men left in small groups. Some returned to villages they barely recognized. Others found that home no longer existed in the way they remembered it. The soldier carried war with him, not as memories of battles, but as habits. He woke early, even when there was no reason to. He remained alert to sounds that no longer mattered. He conserved energy instinctively. Silence felt different now. Stillness carried weight. Family members noticed changes they could not name. The soldier spoke less. He moved with restraint. He reacted slowly, carefully, as if every action required consideration. The body bore signs of time spent in service. Scars, lingering pain, weakness where strength once lived. Healing was incomplete, but accepted. The mind, too, carried marks. The soldier found it difficult to think in long terms. Planning far ahead felt unfamiliar. The future had once been uncertain day by day. Now certainty felt unnatural. Some soldiers returned to work easily. Routine helped. Physical labor felt familiar, grounding. Others struggled. Without the structure of the army, days felt unshaped, open in uncomfortable ways. War had provided a rhythm, harsh but clear. Civilian life felt ambiguous. Memories surfaced quietly, not as vivid scenes, but as sensations, smells, weather, the feeling of waiting. Most soldiers did not speak of these things. Words felt unnecessary. Explanation felt impossible. Instead, life continued. The soldier aged. He adapted again, slowly, patiently, as he had always done. War did not define him entirely, but it shaped him permanently. And in that shaping lies the true legacy of medieval warfare. Not in battles remembered, but in lives quietly altered. The daily life of a medieval soldier during war was not a story of constant action. It was a story of endurance, of routine, of waiting, of adapting to uncertainty without demanding answers. If you've listened calmly, without urgency, then you've followed the rhythm of that life. Slow, repetitive, human. History often remembers wars through moments of noise and movement, but real lives were lived in the quiet spaces between. Thank you for spending this time with Lines of History. For now, let the story rest, and let the past remain where it belongs, quietly shaping what came after.